welcome everyone. Thank you so much to our panelists here, and thank you to all of you at home watching. This is part of a three-part video series for Sphinx that is a follow-up to a sort of conversation that Anthony, Stephen, and I put together over the summer called Learning to Listen. And it was all about Black perspectives in the arts and classical music specifically. And this is one of three sort of follow-up videos, kind of digging a little bit deeper into some of the things that we started to discuss in that discussion over the summer. So thank you all so much for lending your time for this very important discussion. The goal for today for us, and I think for listeners at home, is to just have a chance to hear the wide-ranging perspectives and thoughts and experiences of these great artists that we're sitting with today. Both in terms of just life, amidst this pandemic and getting through it and figuring out, how to adjust to this new normal, as well as ways to, be really active and contributing members of society, both in the arts and otherwise. We've come to realize over this time that there's a lot of change that has been long needed and much needed. And, this pandemic, as terrible as it's been in so many ways, has provided a great opportunity for a lot of people to sit down and reflect and just think about how they can be better, how we can grow individually and as people. So I guess we'll go ahead and kick it off. Obviously, the pandemic has had an endless array of effects on people's lives and livelihoods, for that matter. And everyone's just had a different reaction. Some people have sort of taken the time to just chill, relax at home. Now we have all this extra time. Some people have really been active throughout this pandemic in a number of ways. And so I'd like to sort of go around the room to start us off and just ask about what your life has been like, musically and otherwise, throughout this pandemic. And maybe we could start with Larry.
Well, thanks everyone for having me. It's nice to be with you all and discuss this. Yeah, the pandemic has made us all pause a bit. We've taken pause and we've had an opportunity to be introspective, to look at our lives outside of music, but also with music. It's given me the opportunity to be at home with my family as a performer that travels the globe. 9 to 10 months a year, to have that time and be home consecutively 6 or 7 or 8 months has been a blessing in disguise, I can say. So for me, I took a little bit of time to kind of say, okay, let me just sit here and take it in. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, no one was really sure what the next few months would be. I know we thought that there was a looming type of, we knew it was going to be a global pandemic, but we were hoping that, look, by August, maybe we'll be back in the theaters, or by September, we'll be back in the theaters. And here we are, much further than that, and we're not really like we want to be back. And so I took a little bit of time to take it in, but I've always been a person that I feel like that when you have lemons, you have to make lemonade. And so you have to make the most of the time that you have. And so I wanted to not only invest in myself and my music, but also invest in others. I think part of your legacy, if you think about legacy building, is what you do for others. And so I've been active in doing things and trying to be a mentor, somewhat to younger singers and younger musicians that have wanted to that need guidance, to be honest, in this time. I know some people are doing their senior recitals, and people are making that transition from undergrad to grad and grad to professional, and their path forward is a little bit unsure and unclear right now because they don't know what the future is going to be like. And so what I wanted to do is present myself to be a resource for them to be able to ask questions and stuff like that. So I've been involved in some online projects and some endeavors of my own, but also being digitally present to try to move the conversation about live music and social issues forward. So that's what I've been doing in this time of the pandemic.
Thanks very much. So valuable, so valuable. Pandemic or not, just give your time, and to young people especially. I mean, there's nothing better from my perspective as an artist. Eugene, I'd like to move to you. I know you work so much with ensembles and with students yourself. So I can only imagine how that sort of work has been affected by this time. Maybe you could let us say it a bit.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here with my colleagues. I have to say, I wanted to sit down. When this happened, I'm not going to lie, I'm just going to be honest. I thought it was going to be just for a couple of weeks. And I thought, I need this downtime. And so when it was clear to me that it was not going to be a couple of weeks, I had just got hired by the Washington Chorus in February, programmed a whole year worth of, repertoire, and we had to start from scratch. I mean, so for me, I went into panic mode, obviously. And so trying to think about, how we can keep going in the digital form and start a new job, while being in a different city. So as you can imagine, the stress level was high, but it's been a lot of creating and innovating in addition to the international racial reckoning that happened. That also then took another turn in terms of conversation. So there's been a lot of rehearsing online, coming up with interesting programming, also being a part of much needed conversations about what needs to happen in our world. So it's been busy. I'm not going to lie. I'm happy to work. A lot of people aren't working, but I've been busier, much busier than I thought I would be. And hopefully it's been bringing some joy into people's lives. So.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. It's a strange time to be busy, but it's certainly something to be grateful for. That's for sure. Speaking of important conversations, Lara, you've been hosting so many of these important conversations on a number of different platforms, but I know that's not all. So what has your experience been like since, what was it, March that all of this started?
Yeah, I have to say for me, this has been really a transformative year, or at least a year when a lot of the things that I have been doing kind of just came into fruition, or clarification and clarity. Like Eugene, I was kind of happy on March 10th. I was exhausted. I'd been traveling nonstop. I had been sick with something really bad. I don't know exactly what it was, but I was so happy. I put on my bathing suit and went out in the backyard, and I was just going to take a vacation. And then for me personally, the kind of domino effect that we all experienced through the spring of, we'll be back in June, we'll be back in July, August, September, that really took a toll. And it was really crushing for me. So I suffered from that. And my reaction was to reach out, because just before shutdown, I had been on the road, and I was with one colleague. We'd run into a mutual friend in our hotel in Boston, and we'd had this really deep conversation about how the flaw of this traveling life is that we never get to spend the time and cultivate our relationships in our community. So I thought, okay, this is the time for that. And the seed of my project that I'm doing now with NPR started with Sphinx. I had conversations with Sterling and some of our other colleagues, just kind of checking in. And what I saw right away was that we were all in shock and in grief and loss. And at the same time, we were shifting. We were reimagining and reinventing and, seeing our place in the world in a really important way. I had also in April put out an album called Some of These Days, which was a collection of freedom songs and spirituals. And I had to kind of pivot and think, okay, well, these songs are also about global suffering and, not just the Black experience. And then George Floyd was killed, and then we were in Black Lives Matter. And then that project took on a whole other life. But the conversations have been so illuminating. They give me so much faith in our community and in our desire to be a community and to be a community for good and for change. And I'm so grateful to have that platform. And I think that, in a way, all of our stories are the same. We all want to do better and do bigger and help the next generation and take our world into a healthier place. And in a way, they're all so different because we all have an individual experience. So I'm just seeing this time as a time of tremendous change and hope. And I'm excited and I'm inspired.
Absolutely. I certainly share that feeling. It's an opportunity like none other, I think, for just growth, and I think we've seen a lot, but there's still a lot to be gained for sure. Sterling, what about you? We are colleagues at Juilliard, and you've just given your senior recital, but there's a lot that's happened since then, since March. Let us in.
Sure, yeah. March was a really interesting time for me. Things were kind of hitting a huge point of like peak productivity, peak being there and here at every point in the day, a lot of concerts, a lot of, in fact, I think the very first concert for me to be canceled was supposed to be our Brahms double in March. Just trying to squeeze everything into your typical conservatory schedule as much as possible, and things were looking really great. And when things first started getting canceled, it was more of almost a relief. I had never really stopped to think, you know, am I piling too much on top of myself? It was one of those points where the more you're doing, the better kind of mindset. And I had never really stopped to think about like the healthiness of that kind of lifestyle. And so the break was initially actually really, really great for me. I got to step away from my cello for quite a while, pretty much in the first time in forever. I've never taken a break as long as this one. And it really left me to think about everything else besides music in my life. Of course, music was always everything and at every point in the day for my life. So I got to think about other things outside of that. I got to explore my hobbies while I was at home. Things like my car. I got to just reflect on my own life. Am I doing what I love? Answer was yes, so that's great. And I got to just read a lot, take some classes, and that was honestly, yeah, just great. Definitely wishing I was back into the usual flow of connecting with other musicians and typical musicianship things. But yeah, the break was great. Now I'm wishing it was over.
I think we're all in the same boat on that one. It just seems like there's such a common thread of, you know, the progression of emotions and feelings. You know, we thank God for the break. And then, you know, a few months down the road, it's like, wait a minute, we're still in the break. When is this going to end, you know? But I think hopefully with all of this, with the small bits and big bits of positive news for our country in the past few days, and that is yet to come, hopefully we're on the way up from here. And finally, last but not least, Hilary, I know that you know, you were on a sabbatical for a year, was it, before the pandemic, and then that happened, and I can't even imagine how things have sort of shifted for you. Could you talk to us just a bit about your life and experience in the past year?
Yeah, I'm listening to the stories of the progression of emotions. And for me, I was in an opposite place when the pandemic hit, because I started a sabbatical in September of 2019. So I had a full schedule through like August 31st was my last concert. And then I went on sabbatical, and sabbatical is like no concerts for a year. I had booked a year off. And the purpose for me of a sabbatical is to have no plans and see kind of what I'm hearing right now, see like what I naturally do in my life. Like, is my work reflecting my interests, my needs? Like, am I scheduling things properly? Because when you schedule 2-3 years out, I'm sure farther for vocal, but for me, it's 2 or 3 years out. I think I know what I want to do, but it's easy to get into a loop where you think, you know, you arrive there, you believe in it because you're looking forward to it. And then you're still projecting and fulfilling the expectations that you had for yourself. And there's not a lot of room for a pivot in any of that. So I was in the middle of, I was like 6 months in. The first 3 months of my sabbatical, I was just reckoning with like the past 10 years of my life. Like, so I turned 40 in November. And for me, you know, in that decade since I took a planned sabbatical the last time, I had 2 kids. I, you know, had been doing all sorts of different projects. My worldview had needed to have changed, but I wasn't sure who I was sort of in the chaos of everything that I'd added into my life and all the effort I'd been putting into sort of continuing to develop as an artist. So I spent 3 months just kind of like, when I had a moment, like sitting still in a puddle, basically, like, what's happening? And then by January, I was like, I want to take some classes. I started taking some art classes, and I was going to a ton of performances this whole time. That was, for me, a big direction of my sabbatical as it was turning out. I'm in the Boston area, so there's a ton of stuff. I was going to museums, concerts, theater productions, like every week, ballet. And, you know, I was in the end of my first semester of my classes, and then planning the next semester, and I had some things planned for fun for the summer. And I was building back to perform in September. Already in March, I was starting to build back. And so I spent probably a month feeling really sorry for myself, because I was like, I have this sabbatical I've been planning for 10 years and now I can't do it. And I'm like, that's so stupid. You know, stop. That's like, you guys are 6 months sabbatical. What are you talking about? And I was so glad that none of my concerts were impacted. And I just had to adjust to the fact that I couldn't do any of my sabbatical things that I was starting to get into the flow of. So in that month when I was adjusting, I was like, okay, I'm just going to go through all the etude books. I'm going to work on my technique. And I also was watching social media a lot to see how people were doing concerts, because I didn't think that the situation would continue until September when I was supposed to come back. But I knew that the types of performances would evolve, and I was watching to see if there was anything that I could maybe learn for the future when everything was back to normal. And then George Floyd was killed, and I was watching social media really, really actively. And I just had this, when he was killed, I had this, like, it was like a blow to the chest and sick to my stomach and everything all at once. And it's like, no, 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 no. And of course, all of this had been happening already, but the loops I was in, I had not been exposed to the emotional impact and the feeling of what can I do. I had thought that it would not be my place to do anything. And I thought that would be presumptuous. And of course I was really wrong. And I realized that I needed to just listen instead of reacting and promising things and going through everything I should have gone through decades before. And like in the course of my education, in the course of my life, I realized I needed to just see, you know, what was needed from me. And so I listened a lot, I watched a lot, I absorbed a lot, I read a lot, I dropped all of my practice, I dropped all of my sabbatical plans. We didn't have any babysitters anymore because of COVID compatibility, and the kids were home, and I even sometimes set them down in front of a movie for a bit so I could continue what I was reading or learning. And my life was just catching up on everything I needed to have learned that I hadn't learned, and hearing what I needed to hear. So that was about a solid 3 months of my time. I just dropped everything and I was like, this is my work right now, because I realized from what I was hearing early on that individually as a person, there are a lot of things that can be done. I looked at my career and I saw the huge gaps and realized that I needed to do better. And I really worked on learning the voices that I had not heard and that had not been shown to me, and learning the wealth of artistic expression that I have been missing. And as soon as I heard so much beautiful art and saw so much beautiful art, and I really connect with music and dance and visual arts, as soon as I could see what I could see, I sort of started putting up like a little bit of a path together for myself. Pretty early, one of the first things I heard was, if you have a spotlight, you have to give up some of it. You don't just invite people to be a guest, like you share by stepping away from the spotlight and uplifting voices. And so I really started thinking about that a lot. I realized that a lot of my projects did not represent my values in sort of the broad spectrum of human voices. And so I started looking at every facet of my life. I realized I was not living in a way that represented my values. And so I bought art by BIPOC artists. I immersed myself in all of the performances I could find online. this is my first panel I've been on in Zoom, but I've been watching a lot of panels. I bought books by writers of color. I love ceramics. I have a lot of ceramics by BIPOC artists, and I started looking at the people on my team. And of course, I love the people I work with, but I was looking for opportunities as an individual artist. I can look for opportunities to work with individuals. I'm not part of an organization where I can kind of have much leverage, but as an individual, I changed a lot of the functions of how I was approaching the choices that I made. So I know this isn't the part where we talk about what people have been doing, but honestly, that was the second half of my sabbatical. And that was the work I felt I needed to be doing. And then sharing things I found that I really loved through social media. That was my work that I gave to myself, that I felt I needed to do. And it's the least I could do. So then when September came around, I was like, okay, my fall concerts are canceled. Okay. And then I started going through the roller coaster that everyone else had been on. But when I would vent to people, they're like, yep. And I'm like, but it's new for me. And now I'm kind of in that like 4th month wave of when you see stuff continuing to evaporate. So I had 2 weeks of concerts in 2020. And those were the only 2 weeks when I was in the room with any other musicians. And so far 2021, I don't know what's ahead, but I had some virtual residency stuff that I did in the fall. I have a record that just came out, and so I'm pretty absorbed by that kind of thing. And I just want to say how honored I am to be in this room. I've just spoken a ton, but I don't want to make this about me. I just really want to listen. And I have so much respect for everything that all of you are doing with your work and with your projects and with your activism and everything. So thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. And we're glad that all of you are here. I think that among all of our panelists, we really captured what I think a lot of musicians and artists are going through during this time. Everyone has experienced it in very different ways. But I think that one thing that brings us all together is sort of an interest in activism. And we're all at different points in our journeys towards becoming more active and becoming real advocates for equity and inclusion in our field. But I wanted to sort of throw out the question to all of you about really what you think activism is. And maybe you could go into a little bit of how you have participated in social activism during this time. And if you like to, just for what specific causes, because there are a lot of areas to be concerned about these days. So maybe I could start with you, Eugene.
Sure, I was getting ready to listen to one of my colleagues speak. You know, activism for me actually is education. You know, when I stop and really think about it, definitely in my life as a conductor and a professor, you know, and I think of Nelson Mandela's words that education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. That's really how I live my life. I believe in that. And so my activism, you know, has come about first and foremost through premiering and commissioning and championing voices who are not normally in the concert hall. That, as a conductor, that is one way that I feel strongly about. And I think also the opportunity of giving individual artists a chance to shine who maybe don't have that opportunity. Breaking down stereotypes. You know, Exigence was created to not only champion those voices in the Black and Latinx communities who are not heard, but also to break stereotypes about what people from those communities can do. There is no limit to what people from those communities can do, from Bach to Shabach, if you will, and doing it well. No limits at all. For me, also, when I think about as an educator at the university, it's curricular changes. You know, am I only still teaching the way I was taught? You know, most of us were not taught music or repertoire by BIPOC composers and women. And how much are those voices elevated? So I've revamped my curriculum to make sure that my graduate students don't get to say that or make that as an excuse for why they're not programming a certain way. One of the specific projects that obviously Joel Thompson and I worked on in 2015 because of the, sadly, because of George Floyd's death and, you know, all that happened in 2020, what it did, though, is it allowed us to have more conversations about the importance of that work. And so during this time, there's been a lot of what I think is his well-due recognition, right, of his compositional voice that at that time when we premiered that work, the response was mixed. Some people were very much against it, that we were just pushing an agenda of police against police or Black Lives Matter. That was a negative connotation then, to seeing how nowadays people were willing to have that conversation. And that has been, I think for me, humbling, because that's not why either one of us did that. It was for him a chance to process his feelings. It was a chance for me to allow the concert stage to hear those stories, to have those voices heard who are otherwise silenced. But never a full agenda, and never thought that we'd be revisiting that in 2020. But I'm happy and honored that now people are open to having these conversations. They are recognizing the work for what it is, the true genius that he is and the work that it is. So activism is education through all those forms. And I'm trying my best to use my position to open up doors for others and raise voices who have otherwise been silenced.
Absolutely. And that piece, Joel's piece, is such a powerful and beautiful work. I remember hearing it a few years ago and just bawling the first time I heard it, because it's so incredibly relevant, and it was then, and it continues to be now. I'd love to pass this to you, Laura.
I think activism is two main things for me. It's representation, and it's education / storytelling / like retelling. You know, it's interesting. I did an interview 2 days ago, and the interviewer had done his homework and uncovered like this baby record I made in 2001 when I thought I was exploring American music. And he asked me, do you see what do you see as the difference between your approach to American music in 2001 and in 2021? So I don't even know. I think that record in 2001 had maybe one composer of color, it had some women. It was like tiny baby steps, given what I knew then and what I had access to. And over the years, I have been fighting this like undercover fight, you know, to record music by composers of color, to perform it, to like allow people to let me do that. And I've done it in a storytelling sense so that, you know, there is this mission of redefining and, you know, reshaping, redefining the canon, right? Redefining American music, because it is so much more than any of us knew or had been taught. And I said to him, you know, in 2001, I think that my approach to this was to understand myself, to understand where I come from and how do I fit into this whole tradition that doesn't look like me. And in 2021, my mission is to show everybody else. So, you know, I guess that's where those two things come together. And I think for me and for all of us, coming up in this tradition that we care about so deeply, that feels so much like home on one level, and then feels so, you know, we feel so much outside of it on another level, never having anyone to look at who looked like me. So for me to be in as many rooms as possible with as many little brown girls as possible is really central to my work, and is probably the most important thing that I will leave behind. And then this other thing about just changing the sound, you know, changing the story, changing the sound. And, you know, I've just gotten this Sphinx Venture Fund grant to start this record label called Rising Sun with monthly releases of music by Black composers. And my vision about that is, imagine within 6 months how different classical radio sounds, how different streaming playlists sound. And yeah, just, the activism of being there. I think this word is proving difficult for so many of us. And this comes up a lot in my conversations, with Anthony McGill, with Rhiannon Giddens, with, all of us who we're artists. We're not marching, or maybe we are, but that's not where we feel that we're impactful, and we're kind of afraid of the word. And I think activism is being there. Activism is doing this work and being committed to it and being loud about it, and, watching it take seed and grow.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that last part, where a lot of people are now being thrust into activism and feeling the need to advocate, but in a way that they weren't really trained to do, or don't really think of themselves as, I guess, at first. And that's part of the reason we wanted to have this discussion, is just because now it seems to be in many ways such a central part of how so many artists are engaging with the world, just in general, and how we make the music that we're producing relevant in some ways, is to continue to engage with the times. So it's really interesting to hear everyone's perspectives. Wanted to pass it to Larry.
The word activism for me is pretty simple, and it's act. And I think it's just putting in to motion some of the things that are that you want to see happen. I think a lot of people mistake activism from changing their Instagram statuses one day to an all-black page, or writing Black Lives Matter, or something that is simplistic as that. And not to discount that their desire to do something, but I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes beyond you just sitting behind your computer or your phone to say, I'm against, racism, or I'm against this, or I'm against inequality, or gender discrimination, or, handicaps, or whatever it is. I think activism is actually stepping away from your device sometimes and actually thinking about how you can make the world better. It doesn't mean you have to go down to ground zero and be in the rallies. It can be a part of that too, but sometimes even that can be, I think, falsely mistaken as activism, because when you're in a group, sometimes you feel the comfort of other people, and not to say you don't have a genuine desire to make change, but I think it's what you do yourself. I think activism can be as simple as you reaching out to one of your friends, a BIPOC person, and saying, look, I don't get this right. The thing is, I want to make sure I make a change for someone else in my position of power. If I'm a professor, or if I'm a conductor, or if I'm someone else hiring somebody in this business, I want to make sure that what I'm doing is not causing someone else to not be able to reach their goals, the things that they were set up on this earth, or they've been working hard to do, things that they should accomplish because of their talents and their gifts. Activism is you could be the one who's doing the hiring, saying, we're going to make sure we have 5 candidates of color intermingled with 5 candidates, whoever it is, but making it a necessity that these people are included. And so activism can be so many things, but it is more than just a simple gesture that some people take really lightly. And so activism for me is involving myself in conversation sometimes, inviting others, being the interviewer, being the interviewee, reaching out. People reach out to me to do magazine articles or whatever. And for me, activism is talking from my heart, but also not letting the talk be the only thing, but the actions that I'm doing as well. So going back to that word act, so people can look at my track record and say, okay, I've seen you've been doing these things. I've been trying to do community concerts that try to reach out into the different communities to expose classical music to other people, but also with this message of promoting an image of, black men who really want to be a part of society, who want to be positive, who want to be doing things that are building others up. So often, the image of a black man is shot down because they have so many different things about, people will say who we are, and it's mistaken. I remember Randall and I don't know if Randall was there, but Randall was so gracious to take part in this song cycle that was created by Tyshawn Sorey and myself and Terrence Hayes. And in one of the rehearsals, I remember after the rehearsal, we were standing on the corner, and the comment was made like, if someone rode past here and saw this collection of black men, they probably would assume, depending on where you came from, that we were maybe up to no good. They would know that all the things that have happened, that, these are some of the highest level performers in every respect that we have here. People who've performed for kings and queens and presidents and, have advanced degrees and done so many things. People would assume just by the way we look that we would be up to no good. But if the same thing were true with a group of white men, they would probably think you were looking at a group of bankers or doctors or lawyers or what have you. And so, activism is me living my life to show people that the images or opinions that you have of people that look just like me, or this group of people that I'm involved with at this moment, standing on the corner, having just performed this insanely, and Randall can absolutely attest to this, insanely cerebral, difficult, genius piece of music we had worked about, and we were talking about everything from accidentals and rhythms and the genius writing. We weren't talking about drugs and rap songs and hoochie mamas. It was one of these things we'd been talking. And so activism, is going back to this, is like me being the example of who we really are. This song cycle that we talked about was saying that we're fathers, we're husbands, we are people who have hope and dreams. We have questions about life, the same questions that other people have. So that's my take on activism. But it all starts with acting and really doing more than I think the minimum. I think the minimum isn't acceptable. You can't call yourself an activist when it's something that you don't have to get off your rear end to do. So that's how I approach activism.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, please.
Because what Larry's saying is so true, and I think that we're both saying the same thing too, like this fear of activism because it's not big enough. But I think it's really the small actions. It's the small, meaningful, genuine, authentic actions. It's educating yourself, right, Hilary? It's educating your children better. It's not doing something showy and public every day. But I hear you about, just making the meaningless gestures, and that's really toxic and really dangerous. But I think just small steps to stay faithful in small steps.
Well, part of that too is I think a lot of people really want to feel comfortable. So a lot of these people, they run to the fastest thing that they can say, "Oh, I marched in a protest, and now I'm an activist." And I think, like you said, it's the small gestures that are like, okay, no one knows this, but I know in my heart I'm doing things to make my life, for me to be, maybe I'm speaking from the standpoint of someone who's maybe not a person of color, or maybe a person of color. I'm doing things now that it's not flashy. It's not in everyone's face. It's not a Facebook status. It's not an Instagram status, but it's something that I'm doing that I know in my heart will really move this discussion further, and it will be meaningful in this real fight towards activism.
A lot of wisdom there. Sterling, love to have your perspective on this as well.
Sure. Well, if I can just sort of set the stage first for how I sort of got to thinking about my efforts in the past year. So as I kind of touched on before, around March of 2020, I was kind of really hitting like the peak of just everything in my musical career. The final concert I had was a solo concert at Carnegie Hall. So I just left New York, going home to quarantine, thinking, wow, I've definitely made it to some degree. And I had not really been back home in my own community since high school. I had kind of infrequently visited home for no more than really a week at a time throughout my my college years. And so finally being back home for such a long time, it got me thinking about home and my own community, that being Newport News, Virginia. And so it sort of got me thinking, wow, I mean, I've gone from a point, which is here in Newport News, Virginia, which I would say, if you knew Newport News, Virginia or Hampton Roads or 757, at least in my experience, it's just particularly difficult to have reached a point of like going to a prestigious conservatory without major inputs from certain support groups. And so I started thinking about just how I got to where I was. And it's just due to so many of the supportive organizations and people and mentors in my own community. And so it really had me thinking, since I've gone through college, I've just been so, I guess, distracted, but also focused on the things that my career were bringing to me, which was my career was taking me further and further from home to more and more exciting places, I guess, at the time. And it wasn't until I finally got back home during quarantine that I started to think that it was just, since I had so much time to reflect on my actions and my career, it just started to seem a bit selfish of me to have benefited so greatly, so very greatly from everything and everyone from back at home in my own community. It kind of just seems like I really looked back towards those who got me to the point I was. So I started to think at some organizations that I personally took place in that had just seen better days and better years. Specifically, some youth orchestras in my area, and also just some musical young people musical organizations. Really, just those kinds of things, which had really brought up people like me. And I feel like during my time at Virginia while I was growing up, it was pretty typical to have to travel 30 to an hour just to find a decent kind of musical education, whether it be in like public schools or just private lessons or even just a youth orchestra. I know in the last 4 years of my, I guess when I was in high school, you basically have to travel a good hour just to be in a youth orchestra, period, just because there really wasn't anything in our area. And it's just these things that you would have to leave my area, which is a much more predominantly Black area, to go to places like Norfolk and Virginia Beach, a more nicer, a more white environment. And that was just kind of the norm. But I guess it really got me thinking, well, what can I do to cultivate my own community, my own very local community, Hampton Roads, Newport News. And so I started working, me and my brother both started working with Soundscapes, which is an organization that pretty much directly gives instruments to a ton of young kids. Me and my family were actually the very first people to give a concert for Soundscapes back in like 2006. And Soundscapes just took over this youth orchestra called Peninsula Youth Orchestra. It's an orchestra that all me and my older siblings went through when we were younger, right home for us in Newport News, Virginia. And so that was kind of how I began my quarantine time, when I just had time to think, just thinking, how can I give back to those that gave to me? And then, of course, the events that followed after George Floyd's death had me thinking even more, okay, what can I do? During those times, I wasn't even touching my cello. So it was kind of, to me, it was like, well, first, what can I do outside of my cello? Are there things that I have the capacity to do when I'm not, I guess, in a place of being an artist? What can I do just as a person in the community of Virginia and Newport News? And so for me, being a part of the protest for Black Lives Matter was just extremely, it was kind of, I felt like it was kind of the most I could do was to just be there, be present, be active physically. I had been taking a huge step away from social media throughout the entire pandemic. And it's not to say that you have to do something physical to be a part of an activist lifestyle or activism, although there is something to be said about physical act. I think it's more of just something that directly affects change for what cause you're going for. And social media or just things online can do that. It's not to say that it is effortless to do so. However, there's just something to be said about personally touching a person's life, a child's life. Like I was kind of touching on before, I felt like I had reached a point where I was lucky to be an inspiration to other people, even though at such a young age. And so it was more of how can I continue to be the next inspiration for the younger me, the next young Black musician who wants to be a classical musician. So that was really what I was focusing on. I had recently won a few competitions. And so I was not only being supported by the funds of the rewards for the competitions, but also the Kovner Fellowship at Juilliard. So I had just a lot of financial support. And so it had me thinking, I honestly have more than I could ever do with at this very moment. So how can I give back? I mean, that was really my main focus in 2020 was, I feel like of course I haven't reached the peak. There's so much further to go in my ceiling. However, just after reflecting, I just felt as though I had made it so far, so much further than I had ever anticipated. I just felt like it was time to just at least pause right now and just really focus on how I can get more people who look up to me, who look like me, to get to basically have the same opportunities and paths that I had. So that was really my focus during the quarantine in a number of ways. And I think that's honestly kind of the most important part of really just being an artist, is making sure that you take care of those who look up to you and make sure that they have the same opportunities as you.
Right. That's absolutely fantastic, Sterling. I love the candidness in which you speak about your story. And I think all of us on this panel kind of had this feeling of, oh, maybe what I'm doing in my art could be, seen as selfish. And there's this wanting to reach outside of ourselves and what we can bring to our community and what we do with our art. And, I love what everybody's saying about activism and how what that word means to them. It's work, it's education, it's storytelling, it's acting. And, this idea of being, it doesn't have to be super out there. It can be a very private thing that you do in your own time, which can give the most to others, and really taking that time to reflect on that. And there's so many facets of it. And also going back to what we said earlier about a lot of artists, not feeling in a place to do anything, what their own community is so small, perhaps, that, there's no point in really in doing this. But I think when we tie in activism to these other words of listening, learning, education, there's so much to be said there. And I think I would really love to hear from you all about, what are some of your words of maybe encouragement to others on why this work is important, and if there are others, if there are people that are maybe struggling or they're still in that mindset of, I love what everybody's doing, but, it's not necessarily for me because activism means something so huge to me. I would love to just, get your opinions on encouraging others to do that. And Hilary, I'd love to start with you. Yeah, you raised your hand. You're ready to go.
I have a couple of stories, I guess, stories, but like things that I've experienced that I would like to share. But I also want to say, for me, when I think of an activist, I think growing up, I always thought of people who were at protests, like environmental activists who lived in trees so that the trees wouldn't get cut down, and people who would chain themselves to buildings to prevent measures from being enacted. And for me, I think that I've always sort of considered myself a chameleon, because in classical music, as an interpreter of music, you're always trying to sort of channel the music, but not be the focus of it. It's It's kind of like you're conveying the music, you're communicating the music through you, so it's authentic, but so that the composer can speak from wherever they wrote, from whoever they were. And it shouldn't be about the person who's playing it. It should be about the music to the audience, and you're just the thing that enables it to kind of reach people. And I was very much brought up musically to think that way. And it took me a really long time to get to the point where I was comfortable with my own voice as a performer, being something that would be heard in the middle of that channel. And I think that as artists, it's probably very natural, if we understand what we're trying to do, to set a goal for ourselves and to really try to understand other people. I think, you know, we travel the world, we exist in so many different cultures, we know that so many different perceptions exist of, like, even just a piece of music. And so it's, you know, it's physically painful for me to hear that, you know, there's a struggle between your musical identity and the perceived identity. And I just don't want the kids growing up today to go on stage, if I can do anything about it, to go on stage and be thinking that people might be thinking this about me, or people might be thinking that about me. And I have the privilege to choose to realize that. And I think that it's when someone has the privilege to choose how they engage with a topic rather than have it be forced on them and then they have to live through it. And I invite all of you to just go, like, if something I say is like off or offensive or like just cringy, so please just, but I'm going to try to express myself. I hope that I can communicate what I'm trying to communicate thoughtfully. But, you know, I think I don't consider myself an activist, but I think that prioritization and personal ethics make a difference. And I've kind of realized in this time that I've been off the stage, I didn't really feel like I knew what I wanted to do for myself within, like, who I wanted to be within the career that I have. Like, what is my bigger purpose? And I think all of the things I've experienced and learned and begun to learn, and heard, and all of that in the past year have led me to this conviction that it's my responsibility and the responsibility of every generation to get the world ready for the next generation. And it's the job of the next generation to get themselves ready to be in that world that we're getting ready for them. And so if you have a vision of something that could happen, I think it's your job to, with all of the power that you have, with all of the choices that you have and the different kinds of leverage that you have, I think it's your job to try to create a vision of what your ideal is and like strive to make that happen. So for me, I think I would hope that in the future, not so many people would go into a concert hall and not see themselves, right? Not so many people would be looking at the pictures on the wall of a violin shop, for example, and not see themselves. And not so many people would walk into the home of an artist that they admire and not see themselves represented anywhere in the home. For me, I know from my projects in the past that it's easy to promise a lot and very difficult to make your dreams happen, like whether it's for yourself or for other people. And, you know, I know that if I haven't done something before, I can think it's easy, but then I start the first step and I realize I have to make a choice between doing my best to like get halfway to what I thought I could do or changing course. And I felt like in issues of equity and inclusion, it's very dangerous to state a goal that you cannot reach, because so many people do that. And it's really damaging when promises are not kept. And so I've worked on doing like little steps that I can do and learning and getting familiar with what I'm capable of. So like I think there's a personal activism or personal ethics version of activism, where for me it looked like, and this is just the beginning, but like for me it looked like, okay, the books I'm reading my kids, who are they seeing in the books? And I'd already done that for like female protagonists in the books, but I had not expanded my thinking. So who are they looking at? Does it include BIPOC characters? Does it include trans characters? Does it include non-binary characters? And I was really happy the other day when my daughter said, there was a picture of a mouse, right? And my daughter was like, is that a he or a she? And I was like, I don't know, it's hard, you have to ask. Unless you've talked to the character in the book, you have to ask, and then you'll know what the pronoun is. And she said, maybe it's a them. I was like, representation. Because now we have a couple books about non-binary characters. And, every time, children are very focused on categories because they're learning about the world. So like every time there's a category, I try to say, people aren't so evenly defined by categories. So that kind of thing. And then I looked at the art on the walls of my house, and it was all by women, which surprised me. I had no idea that I had art all by women. I was like, yay, me. But then no, not yay, me. I am not doing a good job here. And so I then purchased art from artists of color. I looked at my repertoire, not good, like really not representative. And I decided to commission some Black composers to write pieces that I could play anywhere, anytime, so that there wouldn't be a programming issue. And also thinking about like the cadenza to the Brahms Violin Concerto. What if I could have a BIPOC composer who wrote the cadenza that I play, so that everywhere I go, that moment in the spotlight literally is turned over to someone whose voice might not normally be heard on that stage in that particular concert. And for my records, I realized I had a record in post-production, the one that just came out. And I was thinking, how can I bring more voices into this record? So I worked with a Black non-binary photographer, fine art and protest photographer in the Boston area. And they did the photo shoot, and they brought in their crew. And so, let's see, it was three Black photographers were the crew. And the studio is run by a BIPOC artist in the Boston area. And so it just really was, for me, those were the steps that, and among others, like makeup, the makeup I wear, I always now include makeup from a company, Mented Cosmetics, which is a BIPOC company run by women of color. And I added jewelry and clothing by Black and Latinx designers. So I just tried to look at like everything that I do, how can I have representation? So I'm always remembering, because I think there are these huge loops that as white artists we get stuck in, and it's convenient and it's not challenged. And there are people shouting at us that we're not hearing. And so if we open those loops, then there's room. And we got to open ourselves up. Like we got to step back a little bit, because you can't make room by just jamming things in. You have to make room by making the room and saying, here's your space. Take more space. Take the space that you need to take to say what you need to say. But the stories I wanted to tell stem from those experiences. So when I was doing the photo shoot, I've always had a sort of self-conscious feeling in photo shoots because I've gotten a lot of comments like, oh, you should smile. And I'm like, but I don't want to put on a fake smile. I think that's a thing a lot of women get, like smile for your pictures. A lot of young artists are told to smile because then you look more approachable. You'll notice that on all my album covers, I'm like, you know, like very like, no, I'm not doing that. And I've had people say, you know, look more alive, you know, look more active, because I'm not a model. And so I told this in advance to OJ, the photographer I was working with, and they said, wait, what? and I was like, well, you know, sometimes I would like to look at the camera maybe. And like, sometimes I'm not expressive with my face and people tell me to like look more. And she's like, oh shoot, I'm misgendering. I'm so sorry. They said, well, you shouldn't be thinking about that. You really should be just being you. Like, my job is to make you feel seen and heard. And I nearly cried because no one had gotten that about me. No one had gotten the feeling that I was concerned about what people would think about me and concerned about how I would come across. And no one had told me that they wanted me to be seen or heard. And that sounds like a selfish moment on my part, but I thought it was such a generous moment on their part. And I thought it was so empathic, and it made me so comfortable. And I never expected that by including a person who had a voice I hadn't heard before, who I hadn't worked with before, who had different life experiences, and by including them in the sense that I had the record company speaking with them, I checked with the record company in advance to make sure they were familiar with vocabulary and like pronouns and comfort levels and like the history of not being respected in certain areas of work for various reasons, and making sure that the area I'm working in is a safe space for the people that I am inviting in and trying to make space for. I did my best, but I am still learning, as you can tell. So anyway, I just wanted to share that I had the best artistic experience of my life in a photo shoot because I broke a loop that I had been in, and I had a different kind of conversation because I was speaking with a person that I was really wanting to listen to, who heard me in a different way as well. And the other story I have is just around some conversations I've had with Black artists that I've been commissioning to write music. I have found that I really felt like something was missing from my artistic life. I knew I was missing like huge chunks of conversation, huge bodies of work. I noticed on my Instagram when I would look in the search, I would never enjoy the search area because it was always, because I followed ballet and classical music, it was always like little hyper-extensive ballerinas from Russia and, you know, self-help things for white women. And I was like, okay, that's interesting, but, and then I started really sharing things I was passionate about, sharing work that I found that I was passionate about. And I found on a global level that everyone understood the story differently. What we were experiencing in America and the information that people who were active on social media were reading was really, really different from the comments I was getting on posts from like the fans from Scandinavia, the fans from South America, the fans from Germany, Switzerland. Like they all had different takes on why I was posting what I was posting. And honestly, I think our job as artists is to share the art that we love. And I was just sharing what I was learning and sharing the art that I was enjoying. And so that's the other story that I have, that when I really dug into like finding my voice as far as how I could be like share the things I was passionate about, that I was really believing in, that then I had to have a voice as well in regards to directing some of the responses and pointing people in a direction where they could understand even where I was coming from, which felt like a really basic place. And I think I've probably said a lot of things that are very like novice right here. Like I am not probably sounding like I am contributing to the conversation, and I'm very self-conscious about that, but I'm just trying to say things so that they get said, and whatever clumsiness I have, I just want to put it out there. And I think I also feel like I feel super honored to be in this space and that you've invited me here. So thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you so much, Hilary. You just covered so many bases there, and just nuggets of gold. I mean, please don't feel bad at all. And I mean, for what you may think is our novice things, so to speak, there are way too many people who haven't thought about these things. You know, making space for voices who are less often heard, right? Self-examining, like you said. I mean, that sounds like a lot even to me. Every aspect of your life, you know, down to artwork in the house, the books you show your kids, you know, the clothes you put on. These are all little things that nobody ever thinks about. But when you start to think about it, you really understand how much you might have been missing and how much you can add, how much more dimension really you can add to your life. So really appreciate all the things you have to say. I want to move to the next question, but I know that Lara, you have something to say.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say directly to you, Hilary, I think that a big part of this is that this is a long process and it's a long conversation. And I think, you know, a big danger is trying to make giant gestures and overcompensate for things that have been a long time in the making and are going to be a long time in the fixing. You know, remember that like 2 years ago when every single orchestra was only going to program music by women from now on. And I was like, yeah, how long is that going to last? You know, and when we throw everything at the wall at once, it's a moment and then it's gone. And I think that to have comfort in sitting into that process and being fine with it taking a long time and understanding your own speed and your own ability. That's one of the most important things.
But I do want to say really briefly, sorry, that I applaud you for being intentional and being uncomfortable, because a lot of people shy away from that. They don't want to do things because of the way they feel themselves. And so the gestures that you've made many of them, and I applaud you for that, because you really want to make meaningful change. But you know, as Laura said, you know, it's something. It doesn't have to be the big gestures, even though we appreciate them. It could be just the constant things that you're constantly doing and being aware of the fact that certain things are, you know, they haven't been a part of your life, that, you know, you've had this massive career and now you're like discovering a whole new world. It's interesting, really briefly, sorry. I moderated some book discussions this summer. I did 3 online Zoom discussions about racism. And so I read some books. I read the book White Fragility. I read a book called White Rage. And I read a book by Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. And it talks about racism. It talks about people's perception. But one of the things that I got from one of the books was this idea of belonging, and how many times that when people say different things, doctors, nurses, business owners, imagine them in your mind, they're always a white person, you know, and this idea of us not ever belonging, but the fact that you're giving the opportunities to these people, and the fact that you're photographers and the stylists and stuff like that, once we begin to put them out there and give them the visibility, then this idea of belonging, we know that there are Black nurses and doctors and the Amanda Gormans that was incredible at the inauguration this week. And these people are getting visibility. And so as long as we're giving these people the opportunity to be out there, that's where the change is happening. So again, very briefly, I want to applaud you for, again, being intentional in what you're doing, but to have those moments of uncomfortable where you just caught yourself not wanting to, you know, mispronounce the pronoun or the gender. This is something that you're teaching yourself that will become second hat. So you're uncomfortable now. but you won't be uncomfortable in the future. It'll just be the way things are, which is, I think, the most important thing about what we're discussing.
Well said. Well said. Well said. Yeah, I think just this notion of putting yourself in an uncomfortable position, whether that's intentional or not, change is not always going to be comfortable. And I think that's one of the biggest messages we can send in regards to all of this talk about activism, is that if you're trying to bring awareness, bring light to an issue that you yourself haven't spent a whole lot of time considering, naturally that's going to be uncomfortable for you to unearth all of those layers before you feel like you're at a place where you can sort of publicly share that. So as Larry said, I mean, I really am inspired by what you've been doing, Hilary, and am inspired to sort of go along, more intently on those lines myself, honestly. So thank you so much for your input, and thank you, Lara and Larry. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think we've got about 10 minutes left. I had a couple more questions, but I'm going to try and consolidate them here. As artists specifically, and we talked a lot about general activism and what, any old person can do, to grow and to contribute to the growth of our society. But as artists in particular, I always think about LeBron James when I'm asking this question. Like, what does it mean to be an artist? A lot of people will say, your job is to play. Just as for the NBA, shut up and dribble was the term. Obviously, that's not enough anymore. People, for example, it's not just enough to even go on stage and play. A lot of people are asking now for the artists to speak to the audiences and let people in a little bit more. Right now, I think that there's so much to say beyond the music. If we can, and I need to work on this as well, but as succinctly as possible, just what is it? What does it mean to be an artist in this day and age where there's so much else swirling around in everyone's minds besides the actual music, right? What does it mean? And that's part one. Part two, for the rest of our community, the classical music community, what sort of shifts can we start to make in our behavior and our interactions to try and contribute more to this growth that we all want to see and that the world so desperately needs? Two very big questions. I know I'm asking a lot, so speak on as much or as little of that as you'd like, but I think we'll try to wrap it up here soon. So maybe I could start with you, Eugene.
Looking for my unmute button. I'm going to start with classical music because that's and then I will go to the second part of that question because I know you want us to be succinct. For me, first of all, I have problems with even the label of classical music. What does that actually mean? Is it code for white people's music or European voices only? So I tend to use the word concert music just because I feel like it allows more voices, diverse voices to the table. I look for a day and age when concert music is at a place where everybody can see themselves on that stage, or they can hear their stories being told on that stage, or even sounds that they are used to regardless of their background, so that this field that we love so much no longer feels like the same old, or certain people are only welcome to the table. That is, I think for me, is really key. Being an artist alongside of that, again, it's not enough just to be good. It's not enough just to work hard and wait for the break, whatever that is. So I hope that whatever I do touches somebody, that I hope whatever I do allows people to connect to my story and hopefully the story of as a person of words. As a conductor of choirs mostly, I hope that the words, the stories we tell, that somebody can connect to that. And so that's succinct. I could go a lot further, but I'm trying to be succinct as you ask us to be. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Well said. With all this talk about everything that's going on in the world, it's so nice to be reminded again that what we do is for the sake of connecting, right, and affecting people in a positive way. So thank you so much for that. Lara, do you have any thoughts on one or both of my huge questions?
Yeah, and I don't know that I'm going to answer either of them perfectly, but I think that what this is, it's about empowerment and it's about going back to our beginnings. And if we divorce ourselves from all of the nonsense around what we do, if we don't believe that we do what we do because it's fancy, because we wear fancy dresses and we play in fancy rooms and we play for fancy people, if we remember that we do this because we deeply love this music and we know that this music speaks and we know that this music connects, that gives us the courage to see our work every day as activism. And then if we beyond that take the steps to make sure that we're delivering on that promise, you know, that for every room we do play in, we also play in a not fancy room. And, you know, and yes, lifting up the ones who are coming next and remembering where we come from and just, you know, focusing on community. I think that this year in my life has given me this real access to, you know, all the things that we can think of as cliches, that music is a universal language, that music heals, that music connects. I believe those things now. I see them. I see in this time of trouble and, you know, division and fear and isolation, how much our music can do. And I just hope we carry that with us and we do act on it every single day in, you know, small and large ways.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Larry?
You know, I go back to this this word artist. And sometimes maybe I oversimplify things, but I think people overcomplicate things sometimes. I call myself an artist, and I think an artist creates art. And that's not something that you mail in. It's not something you phone in. It's very easy, especially at a very high level. And I'm in a room, a Zoom room of some very high level artists, extremely high level artists, and who I have great respect for. But, you know, the thing is, it's easy to really give a great performance without your heart in it. But I think an artist really puts their heart into it. And so for me, it's always trying to make sure that I sing from the heart. And I'm not a cookie cutter. I'm not a regurgitator of information of things I've learned that I technically perfected this thing. And I can sing all the roulades and the runs, and people may be in the audience and say, oh, that was a great job. But there's a difference when I really try to connect to what I'm doing, to be expressive and to try to make meaning, to try to bring to life what the composer really intended, and to make it seem as if whatever piece I'm performing was written for me. I have that idea and the sense of responsibility to give the performance of what I'm doing. Now, this doesn't always happen because life happens. You can have a headache, you could be tired, you're trying to remember the words, you know, for myself as a singer, or you're trying to remember, oh gosh, is that B flat 2 bars? Was it, you know, or is it you know, beat and a half, or all these other things. But when you can really kind of lock into the meaning and your purpose as an artist, creating art, I think that's where it really lives. And I think this really goes beyond the footlights, and it goes into the theaters. And even if we're doing things virtually, I think people can really tell. It's something that's palpable. It's something that you can say. It's sometimes it's, you know, you can't express it. It's just that's it. That's it. And so for me, my job, my pledge is to try to be that artist that tries to bring something special. I was always told that, you know, as a black man specifically, that I need to be good technically, but I also have to be special. And so not that I'm saying I want to be special, but it's just like, I know if I'm doing the work and I'm really giving my all and singing with my heart, I think hopefully somebody will feel that I am meaning to be as expressive as possible, and then they will find something special in that.
Again, brilliantly said. Before we wrap up, Sterling, I think you are younger than me, right? You're the youngest one on this panel. For our generation, right, who is, you know, via social media and all of these different technologies are in ways a lot more connected than people used to be, right? As far as activism goes, and as far as, you know, artist activism specifically for our colleagues, do you have any like words of advice, words of wisdom, just things to keep in mind for people who are our age, who are sort of, who may or may not be feeling lost as to, is this what I want to do with my career? Is what I'm doing big enough? Is what I'm doing important enough? Is it relevant? Any thoughts?
I think especially as a conservatory student, it's easy to get lost and just trying to catch the next biggest concert or the next biggest achievement, competition, things like that. And I think one of the great things about the pandemic is that almost everyone has had a lot of time to sit back and just think about your own values. And I feel like once you've done that, the next thing to do would just be to assess your own strengths and weaknesses. So for example, I mean, maybe during the quarantine, I was thinking about some big plans of commissioning certain things and doing my own projects. But the truth is, I'm not an organizer or an administrator or anything like that. So I know my strength is playing. Okay, well, there's still so much I can do with that. I think once you've assessed your strengths and your own values, just make sure that your primary role, whether it's just playing or whether you love to be a mix between administrative and playing, I think just as long as you're always working towards those values, that doesn't mean that you have to necessarily deny certain concerts just to make sure you, I don't know, fit in whatever, if, for example, community work is one of your values or something like that, it doesn't mean that you can't balance what your idea of a successful career as a musicianship and your values are. I think that it's the goal is to make them one. If you can make your values into what you want your career to be, so you can do everything kind of all as one. It's kind of like trying not to separate your vegetables and your protein, but just kind of having like one balanced, healthy plate, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I mean, that's currently what I'm trying to work towards, is just trying to make it all into one, so I don't have to schedule each portion throughout my life. So I think that's really it. It's just you know, we've had the time to think. Now just do what you really want to do in your life, and go for it. Don't be distracted by the typical conservatory. Go get them for only, you know, Carnegie Hall. That's the only thing you're striving for. Make sure you're looking back and giving back to everything. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Balance is huge. Balance is crucial. We've heard such inspiring words from everyone. Hilary, you and yourself included. I was wondering if you might leave us with some closing words. I know that you you know, have, like you said, seen varying degrees of responses from your fans all over the world, from your sort of changing perspectives, at least as social media sees it. Any thoughts or words of encouragement for those of us who are watching who may be feeling the same way that you are?
You know, I believe that art is being sort of an ambassador for the art to the people, and back. It's this cycle. So as a performer, you're working with the composer's ideas, and you're sort of an ambassador for that piece, and you're really trying to communicate it to the audience, and the audience is communicating back to you. And in a sense, you're putting that back into the piece, and the piece exists then in the future with all of that energy inside of it. And I actually wanted to ask a question of any of you who would like to answer it. I would really love to know, I don't know if this is a good question, but it's one I really am curious about, whether there's a thing that you wish people, like soloists who, me and people who look like me and who are performing like from a place of privilege, what do you wish that we would do that we aren't doing? What can we do better? I know there's a ton of stuff, but like, what could we do better? Does anyone have something that they would love to? Yeah.
I really do. And I've thought about this a lot. And I think that, you know, the work that I'm doing really deeply in excavating and sharing music by Black composers. And, you know, this is such a rich tradition. There's so much more of it than most of us know. And one of the things I'm trying to really clarify is that it's not a narrative of a first and an only. Those are the only stories that we ever hear. And in fact, these are communities, this is a lineage, and it's a legacy. And I think that something that would really change quickly the perception of concert music is to have that repertoire in the mainstream. And so I hear you saying, you know, that that's what you're taking on, but for the longest time, it's been such a niche area. And I think that most of the people who have been advocating for it have been performers, artists of color. So, you know, I think the efforts that I'm making have a lot to do with pushing this music into the hands of other artists, of scholars, of teachers and students of the next generation. I think that's I feel like that's one of the most rapid and impactful changes we can make.
I might actually add one thing on that too. That's just going off of what Laura said. I think that that's really important. I think that it's incredibly important that we realize how understudied a lot of music is by people of color and female composers and composers and performers that have just been left out in general. You know, we know where Mozart was when he was 14, you know, at 6:30 p.m. on this day. He was writing this, you know, we know every single thing that was going on. And we know when he puts this in the piano part, oh, this is the type of cadenza that he might play because it's been transcribed by, but we don't know these things about a lot of people that were left out of the conversation, either because those things have been destroyed or just no one thought it was important enough to document. So I think there's this element of humanization of all of these people that we're trying to bring into the fold, and realizing that playing music of a wide range of composers is not one thing, but it's all good. Like if we have to become specialists on Samuel Coleridge Taylor's music, like there aren't very many people that actually specialize in his music, or you know, enter any number of names in that category as well. So I think that that's something that's really important, because I think that just with the way that the industry works and the little experience that I have, is that people don't always spend the time to really get to know something well. If you're in an orchestra and you really only have 2 rehearsals to put together this, you know, new piece by a Black composer, maybe it needs more time than that. You know, maybe you got to know those spirituals before you're going to just get up there and wave your hands and do it. So I just wanted to add that, because I think that sometimes we view underrepresented voices as maybe not a monolith, but as less individual, less completely human in some ways than the canonic composer. So I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great note to end on. And thank you, Hilary, for throwing the question back at us. You know, the question of that Stephen brought up as to, you know, how much we know about people like Mozart and Brahms and Beethoven. It doesn't even compare, you know, to the, first of all, the amount of research that we have, even for someone like a Florence Price or a Samuel Coleridge Taylor. You know, so it's up to us really to try and put ourselves in their shoes in the same way that we would for, you know, a certain group of people who we want to advocate for, you know, in terms of activism. So I think, you know, we found a lot of parallels and a lot of common threads in this conversation, as far as just, you know, taking the time to sit back and reflect before you say something, and you know, after you say something, really take the time to listen and ingest and process the response that you get. And, you know, I think that all just contributes to just a more empathetic, you know, society to live in. And it makes things a lot more comfortable for people, all, maybe not right now, but, you know, once we get used to this sort of thing, you know, I think we'll all be a little bit better off. So thank you all so much. I'm so grateful for all of your time and for all of your wisdom and insight. This has been such an amazing and inspiring conversation for me. So thank you for those at home who are watching as well. I hope you got as much as we did from this conversation, and I hope it gives you you know, a springboard off of which you can jump into your next conversation or your next period of reflection, or whatever it may be that is most meaningful to you. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it, and I hope you all have a lovely day wherever you are.